June 4th, 2023. Zaporizhzhia Oblast, southern Ukraine. The most anticipated armored offensive of the war begins. Ukraine has spent months preparing, the West has spent months debating, Germany has spent months resisting, then relenting, then delivering, and now, finally, the tanks the world has been waiting for are moving. Leopard 2A4s and Leopard 2A6s, the gold standard of European armored warfare, the benchmark by which every other NATO tank is measured, the vehicle that 30 nations operate and defense analysts routinely describe as the finest production tank on Earth, are rolling into the Zaporizhzhia steppe toward Russian defensive lines. For 4 days, everything goes according to plan on paper, and nothing goes according to plan on the ground. On June 8, a Russian drone orbiting over a convoy of Ukrainian armored vehicles near Novopokrovka captures footage that appears on social media within hours. A column of Leopards, moving uncomfortably close together on an unpaved road, is struck by Russian artillery directed by the drone above. At least one Leopard 2 burns. The Russians post the footage immediately. They have been waiting for this moment for months. The tank that the Kremlin's propagandists had tried and failed to claim they had destroyed, before it even arrived, in fabricated footage, was now burning in a field in Zaporizhzhia, visible to anyone with a phone. The world's most respected battle tank had just met the modern battlefield. The modern battlefield had not been impressed. To understand what the Leopard 2A7 Plus was, you need to understand what Germany set out to build when the Cold War was still being fought and NATO's eastern flank was a real front rather than a theoretical one. The Leopard 2 entered service with the West German Bundeswehr in 1979, the product of a development program that had begun in the late 1960s as a joint German-American project before the partnership collapsed and Germany proceeded alone. Krauss-Maffei in Munich produced a vehicle that combined the mobility of the Leopard 1, its predecessor, which had prioritized speed over armor, with a new generation of composite protection and a Rheinmetall 120mm smoothbore gun that matched the American M256 in penetration performance. The MTU MB873 diesel engine produced 1,500 horsepower, giving the 55-ton vehicle a power-to-weight ratio that allowed it to reach 72 kilometers per hour and sustain cross-country speeds that tracked opponents could not match. By the time the 2A6 variant appeared with a longer L55 gun barrel extending the reach and velocity of its ammunition, and the 2A7 Plus followed with modular armor upgrades, a remotely controlled weapon station, passive all-round mine protection, and crew compartment cooling for operations in extreme heat, the Leopard 2 family had become the most widely exported Western main battle tank in the world. 14 NATO nations operated variants of it. Its reputation for reliability, accuracy, and protection was built over 4 decades of NATO exercises and one extremely limited combat deployment in Kosovo in 1999, where Danish Leopard 2A5s served in KFOR without ever firing in anger. The Leopard 2's combat record before Ukraine was a record of exercises, evaluations, and one peacekeeping mission. It had never fought a peer adversary. It had never been tested against modern Russian anti-tank systems. It had never driven through a minefield seeded by an army that had been preparing defensive positions for a year. Ukraine was going to be the first test. The 2A7 Plus variant that Hungary, Qatar, and other nations were purchasing represented the pinnacle of the Leopard 2 evolution. At 67 tons, it was heavier than all previous variants. The new modular armor package enhanced protection against RPGs and modern anti-tank guided missiles across the frontal arc. The FLW-200 remotely controlled weapon station on the turret roof meant the commander could operate the secondary weapon without exposing himself. The crew compartment cooling system addressed the extreme heat that had plagued crews in Middle Eastern deployments. The Trophy Active Protection System following Germany's February 2021 contract with Israel would eventually appear on the 2A7V variant, entering Bundeswehr service from September 2021, giving the tank the hard kill capability to intercept incoming missiles before they reached the hull. On paper, the 2A7 Plus and its close variants represented everything that decades of German armored engineering had learned about how to keep a crew alive in the most demanding combat environment imaginable. The problem was that the environment Ukraine offered in 2023 was not the environment anyone had imagined. What Ukraine sent into the Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive was not the 2A7 Plus. It was a mix of 2A4s, older, less protected, without the modular armor upgrades, and 2A6s, which had the longer gun but not the full protection package of the latest variants. The training Ukrainian crews received was compressed into weeks rather than months. Side index 30-1. The Ukrainian tank crew didn't have enough of them, didn't receive sufficient training time before getting them, and didn't use them in the way they were designed. The Leopard 2 was built for fast, high-intensity battles of maneuver, exactly the kind of war NATO had planned to fight across the North German plain in the 1980s, with combined arms formations, air support, artillery preparation, and the ability to find gaps and exploit them at speed. What Ukraine encountered at Novopokrovka and across the Zaporizhzhia front was the opposite. Russian defensive positions prepared for months, minefields extending kilometers deep and laterally, with no visible end, electronic warfare systems degrading GPS-guided navigation, and Russian drones orbiting continuously at altitudes that made them difficult to engage and impossible to avoid. Site index 26-1. The Leopard 2 was unable to breach the extensive Russian minefields and proved to be an easy target for Russian attack helicopters, which easily recognized the tank's large profile. The minefield problem was the decisive one. A Russian drone orbited overhead as the shells rained down, its crew presumably helping to direct the strike and assess the resulting damage. The combination of drones for surveillance, mines for immobilization, and artillery for the kill was what destroyed Leopards in June 2023. A Leopard that hits a mine stops moving. A stopped Leopard in a drone-saturated environment is a stationary target for artillery correction. The sequence from mine strike to artillery hit could be measured in minutes. The Leopard's protection, excellent against horizontal threats from tank guns and anti-tank missiles fired from the front, provided no relevant defense against artillery shells falling from above or FPV drones diving vertically onto turret roofs. Drones seem to be responsible for most of the Leopard 2A4 kills. A surge in Russian drone ops was the other big factor in the 33rd Brigade's escalating losses. The loss numbers, viewed in isolation, were not catastrophic. In 13 weeks after the start of the counteroffensive, the Ukrainian army lost only 5 out of 71 Leopard 2 tanks. At least 10 more were damaged and being repaired. Out of the 71 initially received, brigades still had over 50 active Leopards. What was catastrophic was the expectation that had been built around the tank's arrival. Germany had resisted sending Leopards for months, citing concerns about escalation, about German historical sensitivities about tanks on Russian soil, about the precedent it would set. When Chancellor Scholz finally agreed in January 2023, the announcement was treated as a turning point. The Leopard 2 was coming. The offensive was coming. The counteroffensive would succeed because the West had finally given Ukraine what it needed. Site index 1919 isn't usually significant, but the Leopard 2 was likely overhyped to the point that it could never live up to expectations. More importantly, it was one of the Western-made platforms that were expected to help Ukraine in its long-anticipated offensive. By the end of 2023, Kyiv's forces had retaken only a fraction of Russian-occupied ground. What Ukraine and the West learned from the Leopard 2's debut was the same lesson that Abrams and Challenger 2 were simultaneously teaching, the tank designed for one kind of war struggles in a different kind. Unlike Russian models, the Leopard 2s protect their explosive shell charges in special containers, preventing the tank from blowing up when struck. All 5 crews of the destroyed tanks managed to escape alive. The crew protection worked. The tactical context did not. After the summer of 2023, the Leopards were dispersed more widely across different sectors of the front, used in smaller groups with better integration of infantry and engineering support. Their performance improved markedly. In the east, in Donetsk, in sectors where the terrain allowed more maneuver and Russian drone concentration was lower, the Leopard 2 demonstrated the long-range accuracy and crew survivability its designers had built into it. But the Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive had already written the narrative that the world remembered. The Leopard 2A7+, that Hungary, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Norway were buying represented a genuinely capable vehicle. The Leopard 2A7V is widely regarded as highly advanced, with a 1,500 HP engine and trophy APS performing well, featuring enhanced protection through a new modular armor package, improved lethality with a more powerful L55A1 120mm cannon and advanced ammunition, and better situational awareness with new sensors and electronics. The trophy system that the full 2A7V carried was the same proven hard-kill active protection that had been intercepting missiles on Israeli Merkavas since 2011. The L55A1 gun barrel improvement gave the ammunition velocity advantages that extended effective range. The modular armor that could be reconfigured for different threat environments addressed exactly the kind of flexibility the Ukraine war had shown was necessary. None of this was available on the vehicles Ukraine received in 2023. Ukraine received what the West was willing to give, which was not the same as what the West's most capable armored formations were actually operating. Over 3,600 Leopard 2s have been produced since 1979. With the tank in service across wars from Kosovo to Afghanistan to Ukraine, the 2A7 Plus costs 13 to 15 million euros per unit. The Leopard 3, already in design as of 2025, will carry a 130mm Rheinmetall gun with an effective firing range of 10 kilometers and a crew of 3 rather than 4. The lessons of Ukraine are being built into a vehicle that will enter service in the 2030s. In the meantime, the 2A7V with trophy continues to represent the peak of what 4 decades of German armored engineering have produced. It is not the tank that won the Zaporizhzhia counteroffensive. That counteroffensive did not succeed. It is the tank that kept every crew alive in the vehicles that were destroyed, and in a war measured in human lives against an adversary willing to accept unlimited losses, that distinction is not trivial. June 8, 2023. A burning Leopard 2 on a Zaporizhzhia road, a Russian drone orbiting above, a narrative forming on social media before the smoke had cleared. The world's most respected battle tank, destroyed before it had a chance to fight the war it was built for, in conditions no tank program had been designed to address. The 2A7 Plus waiting in Hungarian and Qatari inventories was a better vehicle. Ukraine had received an earlier variant, too few of them, with too little training, in too narrow a front, against too deep a minefield. The Leopard 2 did not fail in Ukraine. The conditions Ukraine faced would have tested any tank ever built. But the gap between the legend and the reality, between what the world expected of the finest German tank and what any tank can do against a drone-directed minefield, was wide enough to burn.